Yeah. They gave Lord of the Rings 17 Oscars and somehow forgot every actor. We're talking about a historical betrayal where the Academy worshipped the scenery but acted like the people inside it were invisible.
Behind the ring, in which case you also are meant to have it. And that is an encouraging thought.
Sir Ian McKellen is the only person who actually managed to break through the Academy's weird bias against fantasy. He did more than just play a wizard. He became the blueprint for what a powerful, weary, and wise mentor should look like. In 2002, he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for The Fellowship of the Ring. Everyone assumed he was the frontrunner because his presence alone gave the genre a sense of legitimacy it never had before. But when the envelope opened, the trophy went to Jim Broadbent for Iris. It was a total shock to the system. After that single night, they effectively closed the door on the entire cast for the rest of the trilogy. They treated his nomination like a polite thank you for showing up, then acted like the acting in the next two films was just a byproduct of the special effects. But if the voters were confused by a man in a hat, they were completely terrified by a man in a spandex suit. So by the time The Two Towers hit theaters, Andy Serkis had fundamentally changed the way we look at digital characters. He was the one crawling through freezing mud and shredding his vocal cords on set, giving the rest of the cast a living, breathing person to play against. It wasn't just a voice or a puppet, it was a visceral, physical performance that made Gollum feel more human than many of the actual people on screen. And critics and fans were practically begging for a Best Supporting Actor nomination, but they essentially hit a wall. They were so hung up on this whole CGI label that they failed to see the actual man underneath the pixels. To the voters, Serkis was an anomaly they didn't know how to categorize, so they just chose to ignore him. A digital revolution means nothing to those who valued physical sacrifice. Now, Viggo Mortensen didn't just show up to play a king, he lived like one in exile. He famously slept in his costume, spent days off bonding with his horse, and carried a real steel blade until it felt like an extension of his own arm. This isn't just a fun piece of trivia, it's the reason Aragorn feels like a man with decades of history in every frame. During a scene in The Two Towers, he kicked a helmet and broke 2 toes on impact, yet he stayed in character and used that genuine agony to deliver one of the most iconic screams in the trilogy. Now, usually, the Academy loves this kind of physical sacrifice, but they seem to dismiss his work as action movie stuff. They miss the subtlety in how he portrayed a man terrified of his own destiny. And to them, the mud and the sweat were just parts of a costume, not a calculated performance from a master of his own craft. And while he bled for the crown, there were those who died for the cause.
I wish the ring had never come to me.
Now, Elijah Wood had the impossible task of making a slow internal collapse look interesting for 12 hours. Now, as Frodo, he had to transition from a vibrant, curious hobbit into a hollowed-out shell of a person. It's a quiet, psychological performance that doesn't rely on big, loud speeches to show pain. Instead, you see it in his eyes, which gradually lose their light as the story progresses. And by the final film, he looks physically and mentally exhausted, as if the ring is literally sucking the life out of him from the inside. While Oscar voters typically hunt for loud, physical transformations, they completely look past the way Wood let his character's soul rot from the inside out. Because his struggle was tied to a piece of jewelry in a fantasy setting, voters likely dismissed the complexity of what he was doing. The ring bearer survived, but his protector became the trilogy's heart. If you want to find the exact moment the Academy lost the plot, look at Sean Astin in The Return of the King. By the third act, the entire weight of the world shifted onto Samwise Gamgee's shoulders. Astin delivered a performance so raw and grounded that it essentially grounded the entire high fantasy setting in human reality. When he delivers the iconic "there's some good in this world" speech, he isn't just reciting lines. He's pleading for a hope in a way that feels incredibly modern and very personal. Then there's the sheer physical and emotional exhaustion of the climb up Mount Doom. The moment he realizes he can't carry the ring but can carry his friend is arguably the most moving scene in the entire trilogy. That specific brand of raw, emotional stakes is usually a magnet for gold statues, making it even more insulting when Astin was left out of the film's massive 11-win sweep. It felt like the voters rewarded the technical achievement of the ship while completely ignoring the soul of the man who kept it afloat. One hobbit survived the fire, but a fallen captain defined it.
Let the armies of Mordor know this. Never again will the land of my people fall into enemy hands!
Sean Bean's time in Middle-earth was short, but he arguably left the deepest mark on the story's emotional landscape. Playing Boromir required a very specific type of balance. He had to be arrogant and desperate, yet fundamentally noble. I mean, it's easy to play a villain who's tempted by power, but Bean plays a man who was simply terrified for his people. He made the Ring's influence feel like a physical addiction, showing us the cracks in his resolve before the final, inevitable breaking point. His redemption at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring is a masterclass in physical acting. You can see the life draining out of him as he fights to protect those he once nearly betrayed. Despite the limited screen time, his presence haunts the next two films. Hollywood typically eats up a redemption story like this, but they failed to recognize how Bean turned a potential villain into the most human casualty of war. There was also an ancient evil that was ignored. Christopher Lee was the only person on the entire set who actually knew J.R.R. Tolkien, and he brought that weight of history to every single scene as Saruman. He didn't play a cartoon villain, he played a fallen scholar whose voice carried the authority of centuries. Lee understood that the most terrifying thing about Saruman wasn't his magic, but his cold, calculating logic. He could command an entire room with nothing but a subtle shift in his tone. The fact that he was a legend of cinema finally getting a role worthy of his stature should have made him a lock for industry recognition. But instead, his entire concluding arc was famously cut from the theatrical release of the third film, a move that Lee himself found deeply insulting. When the Academy looked at the trilogy, they saw the spectacular battles, but they missed the terrifying intellectual threat Lee built from the ground up. And as the Wizard's Tower fell, a queen's strength remained unnoticed. Orlando Bloom's Legolas became the global face of the entire franchise, yet the Academy treated him like he was just part of the costume department. It's a massive mistake to write his performance off as just looking cool while shooting arrows. Bloom had to create an entirely new physical language for the elves, a way of moving that was lighter, faster, and more detached than anything we'd seen in cinema. Every movement was calculated to seem non-human, from the way he never looked at his feet while running to the eerie, still focus in his eyes during chaos. This wasn't just stunt work, it was a character's study in immortality and grace. Usually when an actor defines the aesthetics of an entire genre for a generation, the industry takes notice. Instead, voters seem to think his performance was just a result of good hair and lighting. They completely missed the technical discipline it took to make a supernatural being feel grounded and real in a world full of mud and blood. Now, which of these snubs do you think the Academy will regret the most? Come on, let us know in the comments, and stay tuned as we'll be covering more unfortunate names soon.